Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the remote meeting for the Litchfield Capital Improvement Planning Committee for Monday, June 1st, 2020. I'm going to forego the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. I'm going to open it up first this evening to public input, perhaps on non-agenda items. Are there any members of the public that have anything about that's not on the agenda for this evening pertaining to the capital improvement plan?
Yes, this is Rich Lascelles.
Hello.
Hi there.
How are you?
Good. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm a recently elected selectman, and I've represented the town of Litchfield in the State House for 2 terms now. But I'm speaking to you as a private citizen tonight, and just kind of want to pass something by you. For those of you who don't know who I am. Okay, I'm getting feedback here. The reason I wanted to talk, and some of you might know that I'm also a substitute teacher at Campbell. And one of the things that I've always known is that we do a real good job with kids at Campbell, but when they leave Campbell, they're not necessarily prepared for the outside world because there's such a lack of diversity within Campbell. And I've often wondered how could we improve that. And I have to tell you that I'm sort of going out on a limb because I know there are a lot of people who probably agree with me on a lot of things politically, but don't agree necessarily that we need diversity within Litchfield. I happen to think that we should. We also have a crisis here in southern New Hampshire with the lack of affordable housing, particularly for younger people, millennials, and so forth. And with what's happening on the world stage today, I think it's more important than ever that we incorporate more people into all aspects of society. And
so noise that I couldn't really understand you, Rich. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just feel that we need to do everything that we can to maybe bring Litchfield into or have people that don't necessarily look like 98% of the town, and incorporate them more into our community. And the reason I wanted to pass this by you folks is that with the lack of affordable housing, particularly workforce housing for young millennials, I've been thinking about what we could do. And I passed by all of these over 55 communities that seem to be doing really well. They're very well maintained. I know a few people that live in them and they love them. And I'm just wondering why we couldn't have an over 55 type of community with 2 and 3 bedroom homes, but have them geared toward people under 40. This would what I'd like to see is for people to buy a starter home and begin to raise a family and be a part of the Litchfield community for somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000. and I don't know if that's realistic or not, but I just want to pass this by. I know that Jay Minkura, who I haven't seen in probably 25 years, but I used to see him. I know that he's here from the Nashua Regional Planning Commission, and I'm just wondering if this sort of thing, how it resonates with you folks, and if you'd be amenable to this sort of thing to come to town.
Okay, well, we appreciate that. Thank you. You know, what the information that you provided to us tonight, I think this might be something that's pertinent for discussion with the planning board in Litchfield. And if you have a chance to join us tomorrow night, you can probably. We're going to be having a meeting tomorrow night, virtual meeting, at 7 o'clock. So you're certainly welcome to join us, and if you want to bring forth your input and thoughts, maybe you can present it to the planning board.
Yeah, I can certainly do that, but I'm just wondering how you folks feel about it.
Well, I think it's certainly something that certainly deserves. I think there has to be a conversation. I think, and I think that I think it's an issue that, I mean, the affordable housing issue has been an ongoing thing, and I think it is something that should be addressed, and perhaps that is something that the town can look at. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. I don't know if anybody else has any other anything else to add to that. So.
Okay, well, thank you for hearing me out. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. And as I said, there is a planning board meeting tomorrow night. If you are interested on being on the call or the virtual, the WebEx, please feel free to do so. I'm sure the planning board would welcome your input.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else have anything for non-agenda items? All right, hearing none, I'm going to move on to the business at hand this evening. The first thing on the agenda is meeting minutes. Have everybody had an opportunity to take a look at the meeting minutes for this last meeting we had for the Capital Improvement Committee?
I reviewed them, Mike.
You did, okay. Yeah, I did too. They look pretty good. I'm just curious, who do we, for members tonight, voting members tonight, who do we have with us? I know Steve, you're on. Is Sean on?
I am on, yep.
Okay, great. Is anybody else on this evening?
Brian's on.
Brian's on. Brian, great. Okay, great.
Pete's on also.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure we had a quorum. Did you folks have any questions about the minutes? Do you want to vote to approve them? I'll entertain a motion to do that. If you.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as written. This is Brian.
Okay.
Second, Pete.
Have a second. So I have a motion to approve and a second discussion. Those signify by saying aye. Michael Croto, aye.
Stephen Weber, aye.
Sean Flynn, aye.
Pete Stone, aye.
Brian Burke, aye.
Okay, thank you. All right. So Troy is not with us this evening, but we are going to be discussing school department CIP requests. And I believe we have someone here, representative of the school board in Litchfield. And if that person would want to introduce themselves to the committee.
Sure. I'm Mike Jetty, the superintendent of schools in Litchfield, and I'll be doing the presentation this evening. But joining me with the presentation is Corey Isbicki, who is our business administrator. We also have Michelle Flynn, who is our administrative assistant, and Brian Burke, who is the chair of the Litchfield School Board. So all of us are on tonight. And everybody can help answer questions and address any concerns the committee may have. So I am presenting at the moment on my computer screen, and you should see a document that shows the Litchfield School District Capital Planning Committee. And this is our recommended capital plan to cover the years 2021 through 2026. And you can see that we've had a fairly active committee that's been meeting for about a year. Tom Lecklider, who is principal of our middle school, has been the committee chair, and he completed a lot of the preliminary consolidation of information as part of a project that he was doing for a course that he was enrolled in, and then has carried on the torch of remaining on as the committee chair. And you can also see that we have the other two principals, so Bill Lonergan from the high school and Scott Thompson from Griffin Memorial. Dave Ross, our facility director, has been involved with us. We've had both Brian and Tina Harrison, who is the school board vice chair, involved. And then Nikki Forty from the budget committee has been a non-voting representative. And Steve Weber has recently joined us as the select board rep. We had another rep in the past, but Steve is now our select board rep. And so really the key document to take a look at, you can see that there are 11, actually, I guess it's 12 documents that are linked here that get after the work that we've been engaged in and what we've been beginning to engage with the voters on also. But I'm going to refer to this capital plan matrix because it's probably the one document that lays it all out and makes it most clear what we're trying to do. So bear with me while I get it pulled up. So this document basically lays out over the time period from the fiscal year that we're about to enter into, which is the 2020 through 2021 fiscal year, all the way through the end of this plan, which is the 2025-26 year, what we hope to achieve. And bear with me a minute because I need to minimize, I can't see my whole screen. Oh, good. I can just move this out of my way. Perfect. All right. Now I got it. So basically, all of our work and all of our efforts has been focused on Griffin Memorial School. Griffin is the school that's in the worst shape. It was first built back in the 1930s, and then it's had a series of additions made to the building roughly every 20 years. There's been another addition put onto the building, and it's resulted in a sprawling building that currently has 6 portable classrooms out in the yard to accommodate the pre-K and kindergarten classes. There are major deficiencies throughout the building, from a high degree of moisture that exists that is presenting problems. For us, the water table on the site is very high. It's actually in the floodplains, which is another problem for us, having an elementary school within the floodplain. The heating and ventilation in the building needs major upgrades. And so when you add it all up, the sense from the board is that we need to put our eggs in the basket of replacing the Griffin Memorial School and building a new school on the upper plateau, essentially up on the property somewhat near the current middle school. So the the school district owns the entire property that goes from Griffin up the hill toward the middle school. And building a new elementary school on that site is the desire of the committee and what we are making our number one priority. So in looking at the plan that's in front of you, you can see that this year we put a warrant article on asking the voters for $70,000 to do feasibility work. And the voters support us with that. And so that is reflected on this plan as money that we're intending to spend this year, because that's the beginning effort toward figuring out what we need to do and what size school we need to build. We've then included a plan to ask for an additional $125,000 to begin getting architectural plans and site reviews and all of the work that we need to do in the next 2 years that follow. And that leads us up to the 2023-2024 request for a $30 million elementary school project. And so what we're trying to reflect with this plan is the $70,000 the voters allocated, followed by $250,000 worth of planning and site work, so that we can be ready to put the vote in front of the voters in 2023-24. And you'll see that basically, if that is approved, it will result in many cost avoidance in other way down the list of district priorities. I think you'll begin to understand how spending the $30 million is going to avoid spending a boatload of other money that really isn't going to get after some of the major issues that would still remain with the building. But we'll get to that as we get into the presentation further. So priority number 2 is related to district-wide energy efficiency projects. And basically, we're looking at the replacement of both mechanical systems and lighting in order to achieve greater energy efficiency and cost savings for the taxpayers. That is broken out in the plan by the 3 buildings. So there's allocation of money to take care of heating and ventilation at the high school, and also heating and ventilation at the middle school. And I just want to pause for a second, because I know in talking with community members in Litchfield, there's a great deal of pride in the high school as the new school, but just a reminder that the building is coming up on 20 years old. And so there are systems in there that need to be upgraded and need to be replaced because they just are not operating the way that they should be. Another thing that I will just take the opportunity to talk about is, we've had schools shut down because of the COVID-19 concerns. And now we're tasked with trying to reopen schools and try to figure out what it's going to look like to bring students and staff back into our schools in the fall. And all of the stuff that we're reading talks about having a proper ventilation system with the virus being spread through droplets in the air, making sure that we have proper air exchange taking place within the school buildings will be very important. And so we know that we're going to have to make sure that we're investing in our systems and are getting things up to speed, because that's a very real situation. It's gone beyond something that would be nice to have. It's gone beyond, well, if we had it, it would help to save some costs in the long run. It's really turning into a necessity to run a safe school, given the current pandemic situation that we have. So in the 2020-2021 year, we are projecting the need to spend $1.365 million in repairs of the, and that's really the ventilation at the middle school. So the middle school is of the 2 buildings that we're trying to make sure that we take care of the needs. The middle school is obviously the older building coming from the mid-'80s. And so the ventilation system there is in most need of help. So the $1.365 million represents what it would take to get the middle school up to speed this year coming in, so that we can ensure students and staff in the building are in a safe environment. In the following year, we look to address the same upgrades that are necessary at Campbell High School with the $1,282,500 is the projection to take care of the ventilation at Campbell. It also takes care of the lighting concerns at both schools. So we're delaying the lighting for a year so that we can get after the ventilation needs at the middle school. And if you follow that line across, you can see that in 2024-25, it's estimated that it would cost $1,278,000 to take care of the heating and ventilation at Griffin. And so again, that's projected to occur after the $30 million elementary school request has been voted on by the voters, because if they approve that request in 23-24, there would be no need to do any upgrades to the current Griffin Memorial School. We would just limp through the rest of the life of the school until the new school was open for us. The next line coming up is for Campbell High School. So priority number 3 is a pavement request. We intend to ask for a warrant article next year for $85,500. And that is to repair the cracks in the asphalt. And again, 20 years worth of driving on the parking lot is probably more than 20 years because of the when the parking lot was paved relative to construction. But there is cracking, some erosion that has occurred along some of the curbways, et cetera. So our intent is to repair that and to have that repaved. Priority number 5 is the middle school kitchen. The kitchen at the middle school is completely undersized. It is not adequate for the food service program that we are currently running. And we are planning to spend $300,000 to add on to that kitchen. It may involve the removal of the freezer and walk-in that's inside the kitchen to an outside location, obviously connected, but to get that outside of the walls of the footprint of the kitchen so that the folks who work in the kitchen have the space that they need to do the meal preparation. But that's a need that's been there for quite some time, and we really need to get after that and to get that taken care of. Priority number 5 is the high school gym bleachers. So the bleachers are approaching the end of their useful life. You can imagine high school bleachers are pushed in and pushed out many times over the course of a day, sometimes, and certainly over a year. And over time, the system that it's a motorized system that has them move in and out. But some of the metal just gets bent and is no longer able to operate successfully, and it creates problems for those bleachers. So we're looking at a $206,000 request to replace those bleachers in 22-23 school year. The next 2 items are linked, and they are linked to a stadium field lighting project and also a stadium turf field. When you add the 2 items up, it results in about a $1 million request to get the field updated. And we're in early stages of figuring out what to do with that. Now, we have tied the stadiums to the elementary school project, in part in the hopes that state building aid would be available to us, and so that we could do the project simultaneously and receive some reimbursement for that. That's obviously stuff, it's obviously would need to be seen as to how that actually plays itself out. But our sense is that this would give the town of Litchfield a project that they can really be proud of for many, many years. We've talked about whether the location for that field should be on the Campbell campus. If this is an upgrade to the existing football field that is in front of the high school, or is this a new field that's on the location of the current Griffin Memorial School campus? And whether access off of Route 3A with a town recreational facility that really the whole community can be proud of and can utilize, and also that would be available for rentals to other communities. So if somebody was looking to have an event under the lights is something that we could host on the field. And so we've tied it all in together into that 23-24 year, because our sense is that the community will in fact rally around with this. And you know, we don't know what the future would be of the current Griffin school. It may be even a knockdown at this point and not something that the community has a future use for. There may be parts of the building that the community would want to salvage so that we could keep the gym as a community center, have the field space located right nearby, you know, keep the cafeteria, for example, so that there could be, you know, a place for the community to gather. Probably hang on to the old part of the building, the 1930s building, because there's a lot of nostalgia and pride that goes with that building. But it would be our intent that we would continue to access the new school through the campus. So picture a roadway that comes off at 3A and then continues up the hill to both the new Griffin school and the current middle school, so that the public access to the two schools would be off at 3A and then right by the field space that would be there. And, you know, we would simply, if we were having a home football game under the lights, we would be able to go from a practice field at Campbell over to the field, the stadium field for a game. So there's a lot of possibility there. We need to get this down on paper. We need to make this part of our plan. We want the community to understand that we're thinking about this and are sensitive to the expense, but also seeing it as a real source of pride and something that we think the Recreation Committee can join us in trying to endorse and support. Item number 8 are additional classrooms at the middle school.
I'm just going to stop.
Current situation.
1 second, Dr. Jetty. Thank you. At this point, because I know there's a lot of information here that's being thrown out. At this point, are there any questions from the committee so far for Dr. Jetty as to what he's?
Yes, Dr. Jetty, this is Andrew Cutter. How are you? Can you hear me?
Good, Andrew. How are you tonight? I got you.
Great. Hey, why delay GMS, right? When I look at this, it's the very first question, the first item that you talked about, and now we're talking 23, 24. You know, everyone's hearing from the community that it's really in a state of disrepair, and this essentially pushes it off 4 years in my mind. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in order to be eligible for state aid, we have to apply for state aid with plans that meet the state specifications by a certain deadline. And basically 23-24 is our first opportunity to apply because it's all based upon the biennium that the budget is, the state is currently in. So we're in year 2 of a biennium. We've already missed the deadline to apply for the next biennium. So that's really our next opportunity to apply for any state aid. And our hope is that we would qualify for, and this is part of the reason why, Andrew, it's a great question, because you have to spend some money to get plans. You can't just go to the state with, you know, a sketch on the back of a napkin and say, this is what we hope to do. And then they're going to commit millions of dollars of state aid to us, right? So we have to have architects who are qualified, vetted, and can establish a conceptual plan for us to bring forward in order to even apply for eligibility for the state aid. And I'm going to pause for a second and ask Corey. I know he's on here somewhere, but
Yes.
Corey, I want to make sure, because I get myself mixed up. You know, you're thinking of biennium to begin with, and then it's not the current biennium, it's not the next biennium, it's the one after that, which I think is where we land with 23-24. Am I correct, Corey?
That's correct. And in order to, we need to submit an application for the state building aid funding by July of 2021. So just to get considered for the biennium starting in 23. So there's a long process. It goes into the engineering, the design, the architectural, everything. There's a long process that goes into this. You're looking at a 2 to 3 year project to get this thing built and do it right.
Thank you. So,
Well,
you know, my next question as a follow-up, and that makes complete sense. So thank you for walking us through that. You know, my next question then is, given the repair schedule at GMS and given this being 3-4 years out, are you continuing business as usual with some of the repair plans? I know last year when we were going through the budget cycle, we were talking about the replacement of the GMS front entry, which I think is in scope for this current year, right? But the following year was replacement of the gym and making some upgrades to the gym at GMS. So is that still part of the planning? Because I don't see that as a part of this particular schedule.
We've done an assessment with the facilities director, going through looking at projects that he identified for the 2021 year, and we are going to start scaling back on some of those things. We do have the word that has the stigma around it. There is asbestos in the building. However, it is encapsulated. It is not any immediate danger to students or staff. And, to sink another, you're looking probably another $75,000 to $100,000 to do the full mitigation on what's left in that building. So it's taking a step back and looking at those projects now that, if we're really looking to get a new building up and running within the next 3 to 4 years, you got to step back from some of those things, because you're throwing good money at bad, really, at this point, with some of those projects.
Thank you.
Andrew, we had a conversation to give you an example there. We've been on a schedule to replace windows in the first grade wing. And what's the expense of the windows, Corey? I can't remember the dollar amount. Was it $10,000?
About $29,000, I believe, for that bay of windows. I can look it up right now.
And so we looked at, okay, spending $29,000 to replace windows when we don't see the useful life of the building continuing beyond this project or this plan. So we said, are the windows broken? No. Are they, functioning? Can you see out them? Are they keeping the cold out to the best of their ability, et cetera? And at the end of it all, it's like we can limp through another few years with these windows. Are they ideal windows? No. If our intent was to remain in that building for another 10 years, we would stay on schedule with window replacement. But, every $29,000 that you spend on it, that eventually, if you're just going to vacate, and if it's not a safety or security measure, it doesn't make a ton of sense to keep putting the money in.
So we basically, in doing the review with Dave Ross, we identified three sets of doors, exterior doors that were set for replacement, that were a total of $30,000. That they're not great. I mean, you've got some wear and tear on them, but we can make it through a couple more years with those doors. The asbestos abatement for next year itself and retiling was $27,000, and the windows in the first grade wing, I'm sorry, I misspoke. That was $22,000 for a bay of windows. That we can make it through a couple more years with, without throwing more additional good money into that building.
So in the event, so I have 2 follow-up questions, then I'll let somebody else speak, but 2 follow-up questions. One is, in the event that in 23 or 24, whenever we see the warrant article from the building, in the event that fails, what's your backup plan?
So the backup plan, I would believe, is where you see the energy efficiency project, where you would then, if the building project fails, you go back in with the energy consultants and the architect, and you start to do a building envelope project and a full energy efficiency project, where you're looking at windows, you're looking at lights, you're doing the things that you need to do, and the HVAC that would be involved.
So the 1.27 then is inclusive of all of that, plus the updates to the HVAC system, as well as lighting at GMS, current GMS.
Yes, if you're looking at energy efficiency, you're going to look into all those types of things: sealing the building up, making it airtight, the building envelope, as they call it, and then you're looking at lighting, windows, HVAC, all those kinds of things when you're dealing with a project like that.
Thank you.
And also,
The only concern I have,
because Dr. Jetty will get to it a little further. You asked what other expenses. A little further down, you're going to see LMS as far as a project that we scheduled there. If GMS fails, where we're moving to 5th grade to the new elementary school. If that's not the case, then we have a project scheduled for LMS.
Yep, I see that.
And Andrew, I want to address, because if I heard your question correct, the 1.278 in cost avoidance, I'm not sure is going to address everything that we're talking about, right? So when that comes out of the Turner report that was done a while ago, the needs at Griffin, I mean, we've got 2 boilers that are aged and not functioning correctly. Quite honestly, we're depending on our maintenance department to do an awful lot of hand controls in order to get systems to operate. I know that doesn't include things like continued asbestos abatement or new windows, new doors, et cetera. So, if we went back and did a full study of what it would take to get that building up to speed, it would be, oh gosh, you're probably coming into approaching a $10 million repair. I'm literally armchair quarterbacking this as I sit here, but my point is to do all of that because I don't want someone to think. To me, it's an unfair choice: a $30 million ask or a $1.2 million ask. That's really not what this is. This is a $30 million ask to solve the problem once and for all inclusive, recoup money from the state, et cetera, versus it's just going to be an ongoing project to continue to update. And even at the end of that, you still have a building that's sitting in the floodplain. You still have, moisture seeping up through the floor because the water table there is so high. So it's really, I worry somebody looking at this, comparing those 2 numbers in the diagonal cells. That's really not a fair way to think about this or to come at it.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with it, right? So that's very helpful, and thanks for the additional color, right? If we're putting this out there as in the town's reviewing this, I'm concerned about somebody saying, well, it's 1.3 million or it's 30 million, right? So I think having that true number on what the actual costs would be should the new building fail, I think will be very advantageous to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, and to Mike's point, if you're not looking replacement of GMS, you're probably looking some degree of renovation, because there's a lot of updates that have to happen in it, and that would be an expensive endeavor as well, because as we've heard from the state previously, because the water table on that location, there's a lot of mitigation work that would have to take place. There's probably a couple $1 million worth of water mitigation that would have to take place before you can even start to renovate. So,
yeah, and again, I don't want to drag this on, but I think it would be prudent to have that number, what that number is going to be, in your back pocket, because it's going to come up.
Yeah, and I think not just our back pocket; it's going to be in our front pocket, because I think we have to really add all those costs and be able to put it right in front of people to say, look, this is, if you can't support the new school, then this is what the true cost is to get the current building up to speed. And people just need to understand what that true choice is, and not see it as, well, we can just not do that and something magical will happen. It's not going to happen magically. It's going to really involve an investment in that building.
Yep. The second question, and then I promise I'll stop, is I know, Mr. Zabicki, you had mentioned July 2021 for the application for state aid, right? So in 22-23, why the ask for another 125 grand if that work has to be done in advance of the submission for the application? Make sense?
And what we're trying to do, Andrew, is to show the momentum that we're going to need. Remember, this is a plan. And so we're just trying to show that there'll be an ongoing preparation work. The architects aren't going to design the building for free. They're going to expect to be compensated for the work that they do. And so, again, as part of the planning, and we'll zero in on these numbers. I mean, we've estimated, we've looked at other elementary schools in the state, what it costs per square foot, what we think we're going to need per square foot. That's how we've come up with a $30 million price tag. that could be a $22 million price tag because, when it's all said and done, somebody designs a school that meets our needs based on better projections than what we currently have. It could be a $35 million school because, there's a land sale that takes place in town and a new development that people hear about. Who knows what could really happen in that interim. But we're just trying to show that our intent is to continue to invest in the plan to get it right and to get it designed so that we qualify for the state aid. And frankly, if we don't need the $125,000 in those 2 years, we're not going to spend it. We'll spend what we need to be ready for the size project that we're proposing in 23-24.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There will be, we envision a space allocation meeting that would have to take place as part of a new design. So there's, a process that has to unfold. We're envisioning getting support from regional planning to help us with what projections they're seeing. So, when you add it all up, that's how we're proposing to spend that money.
I guess my question has to do with sources of funding and reviewing what we have. Are there any grants or out there? Is there anything from state or federal that may be able to help offset costs on this project? Just curious.
On which project are we looking at? The energy efficiency or the?
Well, I'm more towards the school in the construction of a new school in terms of infrastructure and so forth.
I think I think you'll have, and if we're granted the state building aid, if we're able to attain that, I think that would help a great deal in terms of if you're going to design a building, you're going to design it for energy efficiency right off the bat, in which case you'd be able to obtain rebates from utilities and such. Other than, I've never personally heard of any grants that would fund help to fund a school. It's definitely something worth researching for sure, but the state building aid is going to be the big piece that helps.
What do we expect that aid to be? Do you have any idea based on other schools getting the grants?
Building aid's been in moratorium for years. So this is a new process. Most districts were able to attain it in the past. We're now in a situation where it's coming back from moratorium, but it's more on a need-based type of thing. So a couple of years ago, there was a school that was condemned in Unity. And so if you look in the scenario that we're looking at right now in terms of applying for the funding and getting it on an as-needed basis, a district in that type of situation would kind of get the first look. I think with the building that we have and the condition it's in, I think we would have a solid opportunity of getting granted the building aid money.
Okay. Kind of to bolt on to what Andrew was talking about with the dollar figures for your back pocket, it'd probably be nice to kind of set up some scenarios so we can know what this looks like, because there's a lot of overlap. If this happens, this might not happen. It'd be kind of nice to see a clear path on what the options are and what the totals were, what's going to actually be included or not included, just to help us when we start to document.
If I can pick up back at number 8, and I think I'm going to address that actually with the planning that we've done. So item number 8 is the additional classrooms at the middle school. That's a $1,517,500 request. That's to put 6 classrooms along the front gym wall and to tie those into the building. So basically the portables that are there were temporary classrooms many moons ago. They've really outlasted any useful life. We continue to rent those for about $36,000 a year. There's additional energy consumption costs that go into that. So those portable classrooms alone cost us about $45,000 a year. And we think that that by building the K-5 elementary school, we get the right configuration of classes. Most elementary schools in the state and in our region of the country are designed around a K-5 look. And so if we can achieve a K-5 building and move the fifth graders back to the new Griffin, we can then tear down the portables that are there now and save that $1.5 million, because we're not going to have to add on to the middle school because it would house just grades 6, 7, and 8. So, that entire section for 24, 25 goes away if we know that we're getting the new elementary school that will then house the fifth grade. If the voters ultimately say they're not going to build the elementary school, then we have to do something. We have security issues with the portables. They're not efficient. They're not a good educational environment for our students. And again, they were intended to be temporary 20 years ago. So we would need to add on to the building to get that addressed. And that's the $1.5 million ask. The LMS part.
Another question, if I may here. So if the 1.5 is removed from this, right? Meaning that the new school is funded, you're not going to have grade 5 at LMS. That will be shifted into the GMS structure. Would then the kitchen at LMS be adequately sized to serve the new population, given that you remove a grade from the school?
We don't think so. And the main concern, and Corey, I'm going to have you jump in with me if you disagree, but by all means, let me know that. It's just the amount of space that's in there for the staff to move around, Andrew. So whether you're serving 3 meals or 4 meals, you're literally stepping over each other as a staff because of how tight the space is and the way it's utilized. So my sense is that the kitchen project that's occurring prior needs to occur either way because there just is not enough room in that kitchen. And I think if you compare the LMS kitchen to CHS, I think CHS is like 4 times the size of the LMS kitchen. And I think even Griffin is double the size. So, but Corey, jump in if you think I'm off base on my answer to this.
I think you're completely in line. I mean, you probably have the walk-in cooler. That system probably takes up a good 30% of the kitchen space, and you've got 4 people trying to work in there. And if you think about it, as we've gone through this experience with the pandemic and we have staff preparing meals in the high school kitchen, they're all spread out. If the situation where they had to work down in the LMS kitchen, you can't. There's no way you'd be able to have staff working in that kitchen right now to do what they need to do for the community in a safe manner. They need space to work.
I think the pandemic raises a whole other host of questions. We're not ready to even talk about what school looks like next year. We're still waiting for guidance from the state. But everything we're reading about food service is that even the way we've been traditionally feeding students in the school setting is probably out the window. The idea that one student in line, shoulder to shoulder with another student who goes along a serving line with a tray and food being added to the tray, out the window. I mean, that's not 6-foot social distancing. There's all sorts of concerns relative to that. So we're probably looking at a model where meals are prepared and prepackaged and then are delivered to students, which again is going to change the way they operate in that kitchen. I think the high school and Griffin can pivot on a new model. I don't know how they're going to do it at the middle school because they're literally on top of each other in that space. So it's definitely going to present challenges for us going forward with the size of that kitchen. The next 2 items, number 9 and number 10, are relative to the parking lots at the middle school and at the current Griffin. You'll see that we're proposing to spend, another $500,000 on the 2 lots. Our sense is that if that gets folded into the work that is done for the $30 million elementary school, the plan would be, again, that you would have the entrance off of 3A, that the entrance to the middle school off McElwain would be closed, and that would be an emergency egress only, so that if there were a need to get fire trucks in or people out in an emergency, we could then open the gate and exit that way toward Pinecrest. But by and large, the entrance would be off of Route 3A. And so as the parking lots are tied together and configured in order to make that all work, it would be able to take care of the needs that you see for the middle school and the elementary school. If the project were to fail, then we have work to do to expand and replace the parking lot at the middle school. Last year, we suffered a washout of a drainage culvert that resulted in, I can't remember the expense, but it was probably $30,000 worth of unseen expense in order to repair the culvert under the main roadway. And now we have other evidence that's cropping up currently showing that there are some additional concerns with culvert work. And so, it definitely is stuff that we're going to have to get after and continue to address. But we would prefer to do it without portables in the yard, with the proper sizing that's done and as part of the project that is highlighted under priority number 1. And the same thing for Griffin. Anybody who's tried to park at Griffin during the day knows that parking is a real premium there. There's an intersection between the parking lot and the playground that is confusing to some people. And so, we really need to, if we stay on that site, spend some money to get it done correctly and to be sized properly. But if we move up the hill to the upper plateau with the new school, we would be able to avoid that expense. The last item on here, item 11, is just an ongoing need to continue to save toward projects such as roofing and other capital assets. So remember, we have a 20-year-old roof, or approaching a 20-year-old roof at the high school. And so it currently is okay. We get it inspected annually, but eventually the day is going to come that we're going to have to replace that roof, and that'll be a very sizable project. And so we think it's smart to put money aside and to build that up so that when that project comes to fruition, that we have the money available and we're not just asking the taxpayers to add on for that project. So, as much as this is a 5-year capital plan, really all the eggs are in that elementary school project, and there's an awful lot of stuff that is tied to that decision, because everything that exists in the 24-25 and 25-26 school year, aside from saving money toward the roof, would be avoided by the project of the elementary, right? So we're kind of front loading the things that we need to get after here. There's been really years of delayed maintenance, years of cans being kicked down the road relative to things that we need to get after. Our plan is to get after those things and to be aggressive about it. And then in the hopes that we can land to the point where we've taken care of all those needs. And aside from planning for the roof that needs to be replaced, that we would be in a good position at that point. I'm going to click back for 1 second, and then I'll open it right up to any other questions or comments that people have. But in this document, there is a very detailed description sheet that goes along with each one of these asks. So I worked off the matrix because it's easiest to see kind of the 5-year vision, but I'll just click on the new PK5 school sheet. We'll wait for it to launch here. And then you can see that we use the town worksheet that we were provided for this process. The dates are all matched up to what was in the spreadsheet, the descriptions, the rationale, the narrative. And then this gets into, because somebody asked the question about sources of funding. So this gets into what we project as some of the available funding that would be available to us down the road. And so more of the details exist on these sheets for each project that you've seen here in the presentation. So I think you have access to the hyperdoc here that has all of those documents. And if you don't, we'll make sure that each one of you get this, because going forward as part of your consideration, this will be a key way to access each of the documents that we have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jetty, for your presentation. I guess my question is, if down the road Litchfield does build a new middle school, or I'm sorry, a new Griffin Memorial School, what will become of the old Griffin School? Is there any plans? Has anybody considered what that's gonna be used for? Just curious.
Honestly, we're looking for a partnership with the town on that. There are sections of the building that probably would have some life and use. So I think of the gymnasium and the cafeteria. That a community center is something that could be renovated. So parts of the building could be knocked down, while other parts of the building could be revived and used. There would have to be some investment, right? So the heating and ventilation in those areas would have to be upgraded and so forth. But there certainly is a possibility that goes along with that. We've also talked about the 1930s building, which the town has taken an interest in recognizing by having it placed on the New Hampshire list of historic buildings. That doesn't bind the school district to anything, but it certainly has that building noted as part of the historical significance of the town of Litchfield, tied in with, the Presbyterian Church and so forth. So that section of town, if there was a desire to keep stuff going, I think the school district would be perfectly willing to work with anybody who has an idea for it. The last time there was an effort many years ago to replace Griffin, and the building was actually sold. There was a buyer who was interested in utilizing that building, and so that's something that I think is another possibility. If somebody came along and said, "We've got the perfect idea on what to do with that building," we could enter into that conversation. But so for right now, we're not putting a lot of effort into trying to figure that out. But I am floating it tonight because we've had people approach us and say, maybe that's the best location for the SAU office, that at the end of all this, the SAU office could be located in a section of the old Griffin building. Again, with a renovation, we could make that work. We've had people suggest to us that with renovation, it could be a fabulous police station. And there are communities that have renovated old elementary schools into police stations, and they turn out absolutely beautiful. So again, you have to weigh the cost of doing the renovation update to the building versus building new. But that's another idea that's been floated by the school district in terms of, would you be open to this? And I guess the answer is the school district owns it, but in partnership with the town, we'd be willing to look to any viable use of that. And if there is none, probably looking to just knock it down and clear the space for fields and other use at the bottom of the hill.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of the committee have any questions for Dr. Jetty? All right, well, this time I'm going to actually open.
Sorry, I do. Sorry. Dr. Jetty, if you can go back to the capital plan matrix, please. I think you still have that open.
Yeah, I do. Among my 85 tabs here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot up there. A couple of things. One, on the CHS gym bleachers, I know you had mentioned replacement of bleachers, end of useful life, the motorized and the mechanisms that go in and out to expand and contract those bleachers. The bleachers and the kind of the hard plastic themselves, I would think is okay, right? So is it a matter of replacing the mechanisms that control it, or is this a full replacement of the entire structure?
So I understand it to be a full replacement, but I'm going to yield to Corey because I think he's had a little more conversation with Dave about that. So picture that you see that sort of plastic wall, if you would, when they're folded up, right?
Right.
And I think it's really reasonable to say, hey, that plastic's okay. I think where the problem is in the steel structural support underneath that makes that come in and out over and over again. That's where stuff is bent and no longer is properly shutting. And so it's causing the problem. And so as much as you say, well, save the plastic and just build the steel, now you're into a custom job because you're trying to find somebody who hasn't made those bleachers in 20 years to come back and figure out how to use that plastic versus just installing a whole new system that has the benches mounted to the racks and the support trusses that are manufactured. But
Yeah,
again, tell me if I'm wrong.
Savings, right? So
No, you got it, Mike. You got it. That's exactly it. I mean, and we've got the situation down at LMS as well, where we've included money to look at those for consideration for year-end funding this year, because those are even older and those have been welded and repaired beyond what you want to do to them. So those need to be replaced as well. So CHS would just be the next in line. It is, it's the newest ship in the fleet, but it needs some work. It needs some love.
thank you. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And the difference too is, those are bleachers that were built to seat 850 students or 850 spectators versus LMS. Oh my goodness, I don't know how many people when we do the move up ceremony in the gym there, I mean, there couldn't have been 100 and some odd people in those bleachers, because they're a fraction of the height and they don't pull out anywhere near as far. So they cost less to repair simply because they're a much smaller set of bleachers and hold less weight and all of those factors. So.
Great. The only other comment I'll make, and then I'll turn it back over to the chair here, right, is on 6 and 7, right? A lot of this list of priorities I deem as needs versus wants. 6 and 7 seems to me, or feels like more of a want than a true district need. All right, so help me understand kind of the justification for stadium field lighting and stadium turf field.
Revenue, I think when you have a facility such as that, you're looking at a revenue opportunity where you can rent out practice space, such as, Presentation of Mary and Hudson does that. You're also looking at the extension of your practice seasons, where you can actually clear the fields off when there's some snow on it and the kids can get out there. And I think one of the big things in terms of our student athletes, you're looking at safety. If you ever take a look at the Campbell Stadium field, mid-football season, mid-soccer season, I think we're lucky that we don't have more injuries on that field. That thing gets chewed up. And when you have lacrosse, I mean, don't look at the field right now because it's probably the best it's looked in 20 years, if you want the honest truth, because there hasn't been anybody on it. But it gets chewed up by lacrosse and football especially, and I think there is a safety issue for our student athletes when it comes to that.
Andrew, I think also I'm looking at a source of community pride that, we are a sports town. I mean, let's just call it that, because when I drive home at night, you've got people running up and down Albuquerque. You've got people playing tennis on courts. You've got, not currently in the middle of the COVID, but, that's who we are as a community. People want open spaces. They want to be able to have recreational opportunities. So, the question is that a need or a want? People are in fact, enjoying that this is what's available to them in our town. And so we see this as an extension of that. The other piece you hit on in asking about the timing of the elementary school, elementary school is what, 4, 5, 6 years, I guess. If we end up with a K-5 building, it would be 6 years worth of a child's education. But the sports fields are also an investment that can be made in the town that are going to extend that through grade 12 and beyond. It will allow all of our student athletes and families greater access to the fields. And I think there's a lot of merit to tying that into a project so that we're able to receive some state aid to help pay for it, and at the same time result in just having something that people can rally around and be proud of all across the board. So communities that have put these fields in, they're used all the time. And as Corey said, there's the outside rental possibility, but there's just that community coming together, and the rec league that wants to have soccer games under the lights. That's something that can be worked out and ironed out. So it's just a matter of how does everybody rally around it?
I think, having a Friday Night Lights type of environment here in Litchfield would be great, right? I think you're right. We are a sports town. We get behind the student athletes, and I think the current fields and the infrastructure definitely showcase that support. I guess maybe I'm just thinking about this wrong. I yield to the committee for their guidance. But, when I look at another $1 million+ on stadium field lighting and turf, well, that's, just about 2 fire trucks that we also need. You know what I mean? And there's other needs within this town where I think $1 million would be better spent at this particular time. But that's my view.
Well, I'd also say too, we want to, we want to get the best bang for our buck, but I think, we also want to mitigate the tax rate. And I think what's important here is to see and try to look at when looking at this, is the sources of funding. Are there other alternatives that can help to mitigate any tax consequences for the town? I think that's important. I certainly get the safety piece. We want to keep, our kids safe, and we want to keep schools safe. But I also want to see, the town, I think, is going to be looking at this from dollars and cents perspective. And I think it's important to look at every avenue of source of income or source of funding, I should say, that's available, whether it be grants, whether it be working with the Rec Commission for donations, bequests, whatever. Those I think those are things that have to be considered too when you're looking at this. So that's just my 2 cents. But
we've seen if you go up to Laconia with their new field, naming rights. I think it's the Bank of New Hampshire field, or I can't remember exactly who got the naming rights to the field, but all of those are revenue sources that are available, that if the community decides we can go after. Those are all possibilities. So it's not just a help us, taxpayer help us to build this field. There are other ways that we can come after this.
And I think, like I said, I think that's.
I know that Brian.
Hello, did someone speak? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I know that Brian is also in the call, and I don't know if you had something you wanted to add to any of this as the chair of the school board. I just want to make sure that people are aware Brian's also with us. And, a lot of this is getting this out in the public now. We've been doing obviously a lot of work to get this pulled together. And, this kind of feedback is really important to us also going forward, because, we have to figure out if there's public sentiment on the priorities. We're going to listen to that.
I was just going to say that there are a few things that I'll just add to it. One, I think anyone who's involved with any type of athletics in this town realizes that field availability is kind of limited. Second, GMS, as far as their soccer field, which has been utilized for years, I don't think we've used them over the last year, maybe year and a half, because of moisture problems. And the other thing is, as far as utilizing a turf field, we have sports teams right now in high school that end up going to like Bedford Sports Zone or Sportsplex to practice as far as lacrosse and soccer at different times. And they incur that expense as far as to put their team out there, where they can, if you have a turf field, you can play on a turf field probably like 10 months out of the year. And you just plow it. I mean, for the most part, we have a month and a half, 2 months that would be too cold for them to play on. So our sports teams could practice more. So maybe they could be even better than they are now. And what Dr. Jetty has mentioned several times, anybody who's gone to Sportsplex sees that they have 2 buildings that are full all the time. And we're talking year round. And that's why I think that there's a possibility to have a source of revenue just by having a turf field, especially if you have one with lights.
Okay.
I think it'd be nice to know what that rental cost is, that if we had a field that we could rent it out. I mean, you know, it'd be nice to be able to say, hey, you know what, we're going to get this much money back. I think the idea about the naming, I think, is great. I think that'd be nice, something to pursue. Maybe we could get something up front and say, hey, you want to put your name on the field, we need X dollars from you up front, right? Just help offset some of the costs.
Yeah.
You know? I think those are great ideas.
I agree. Okay. Does anybody have anything else before I turn it over to public input? I wanted to get the opportunity to get into public input. So I'm going to open it up right now.
Yeah, I have something for Dr. Jetty.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, this is Sean Flynn, citizen rep on the committee.
Hi, Sean.
Your metrics, anticipated bump in enrollment, you know, I don't know, this may help, and I don't know if it will. Do we have, can we get a solid, like a certified projection of enrollment, you know, what the town expects for people moving in? Maybe if we had a solid number, I think we can all agree it's going to go up. Yeah. But if we had something that it wouldn't just help with number one, but I think it would help across the board to give a good number of what we're projecting for the town growth.
So our current enrollment projections are done in-house, and we use our own modeling based on a 3-year cohort to make predictions. And actually, they've been pretty close. The one thing that we have, a couple of things that we've noticed. So the current increases in enrollment are at the elementary school. So it seems as if the families moving into town have younger kids. And, you know, the general sense is that the families who have raised their families in town, have had kids go through the school already, are now in the process of downsizing by selling the larger family home, maybe moving into one of the 55 plus communities, or moving into a smaller house for the future. And then that's why the youngsters are coming along, because they're then buying those homes that become available. So we project that those numbers that are pretty healthy and strong at the elementary level are going to continue to rise back through the system. But a couple of unknowns. You know, with the pandemic, everybody's talking about the new normal. We don't know exactly what that means for school in the future. So that's a big question mark that we're going to need some help to sort out. You know, will people find that remote learning was really a desirable way of proceeding and opt more for that in the future? We've had plenty of families who have said, you know, you guys have done the best you can in this situation, but we don't want to do this another year. So they want to get their kids back into school too. So it's really hard to predict what that's going to be. And then I've joked, but I haven't joked about the baby bump that is to come, because anytime there is a long-term disruption like this, it does result in a rise in births. So we need to get that school built before the baby bump arrives, because it could present a problem for us down the road. If all of a sudden there is an increase in kindergarten enrollments 5 years down the road, we need to make sure that we've got the space for them. And it's not out in portables. The portables are beautiful, don't get me wrong. But again, it was a kind of a temporary solution to a long-term problem with enrollment changes taking place. So that's just my gut reaction, Sean, to some of the projections. We would think that regional planning could help us do an even better job of taking a deep dive and looking at it. The other problem in a town like Litchfield is there is a ton of open space that we all make assumptions about. And the assumption is that the open space will remain. But that's not necessarily the case. And so, there could be unknowns that occur and developments that aren't even on the horizon right now that could change all of this pretty quickly. It would unravel pretty quickly if there were to be a large scale development that came in.
I mean, we also have on the call tonight Jay from Nashville Regional Planning.
Thanks.
Jay, what have you seen, or do you guys have any projections on residential increase in southern New Hampshire? I meant to send you an email earlier this week asking that question, but I should say last week, but I know you guys do planning in that regard.
So we do, and honestly, had I thought in advance, I would have probably pulled some Litchfield numbers. So I have not done that, but we have done actually projections out to 2045. Obviously, the farther out you go, the more questionable they are. I would say overall, whenever you look at projections, they are obviously affected by the inputs you're going to get. What are your data inputs? And what our data inputs have shown is a slowdown generally in both births and migration. So both have decreased, and as a result, our projections going forward have tended to decrease overall. We also have an aging population, and so we're seeing that impact our projections as well. That's pretty much across the board. However, town by town, you can see some very, very different numbers. Litchfield tends to be younger than most towns, and it tends to have more kids. In fact, I think it's top 2 or 3 in terms of household size. And that's just the nature of the town, the nature of the housing stock, really. So, I think the superintendent is right in that the kind of housing that Litchfield has does lend itself to turning over and more younger families coming in. I think that's going to keep your numbers higher than you're going to see elsewhere. So that's the overall, that's the average. Again, I don't have the exact numbers. I can shoot them out to you, though. And to the committee if you're interested in what our projections are looking like, both for the region and for Litchfield. That said, and I think that the last point that was made is a significant one. We'll project based on past history. So we're going to look at what was the history of building permit activity going forward. We also know that that's going to be influenced by the recession, which clearly had an impact on building and throughout the region. But 1 or 2 significant developments can make a difference. So that's that caveat that's always out there. So we have projections, we'll show them. They do show slowing growth trends, but that's for the region as a whole. We look at them town by town. Those could change. You got to keep your eyes on what is the vacant developable land. What we haven't done in the recent past is some sort of build-out analysis that kind of goes along with those projections to see what your potential really is. That might be a worthwhile exercise because it does get to that point. What if a lot of what's open space that's not protected out there is in fact developed? That's a long answer. helpful that was.
But thank you. I know because we went back in the planning board, I know we had spoken about this once before. And also we do have a new development that's coming online. And I do know, I think it's one or two others that are in planning right now. So, you know, based on the style houses that are going to be put in, I do think we're going to get more younger families moving back into town, which is going to affect the numbers. But if you could share that data, that'd be fantastic.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. That would be good. Great. Okay. All right. At this point, I'm going to open it up to public input. And I don't know if there's anybody out there from the public that listening in to this conversation. So
Sorry, Mike, can I just add something?
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I was like talking and then realized I was muted.
Okay.
You know, to Sean's point, he was asking, can we get a solid projection? Unfortunately, we can. I think that was just explained from the last two people who spoke. But if you go back like 5 years ago, and Andrew, you were on the budget committee at that time, if you looked at the projected numbers to where we should be like right now, those numbers were way off. We more or less stabilized over several years as far as our numbers, where we actually should be much lower than we are right now, because there's just so much flex as far as, like they're saying, people moving out, people moving in. So that number is so fluid, and I think our projections over the last couple of years have been probably dead on. But if you go back 5 years ago, those numbers were, the projections were much less. So it's difficult, and I'm sure Dr. Jetty, I mean, he has been involved with it for quite a while. Getting a solid number as far as the projection, especially when you start projecting 3, 4, 5 years out, is difficult. But just looking at what the trend has been, I think lately, as far as in Litchfield, I think we're in pretty good shape.
And, you know, I think I do recall what the planning board had done some sort of discussion about the whole issue of surrounding development and, you know, the open space and, you know, building out into the town. And I think that, you know, maybe this is an opportunity to go back and look at that, that data again and see what's available.
Michael, I believe we did do that in the last review of the master plan we did.
Yes, I think you're right, Steve. I remember doing that. We did have a long discussion about that. So I think we kind of looked at that issue. And, you know, as I said, I think that, you know, do we know what the impact on the tax rate for all of this is going to be? I mean, we're talking about a lot of money being invested into, you know, infrastructure and you know, renovations and doing all this work. Have we really looked at these, really looked at the tax impact? That's my question.
It's a very difficult calculation to make at this point when you're looking 3 to 4 years out. You don't know exactly what the state revenues are going to look like and what the local taxation piece of it's going to be. You can do a pretty good estimate going into the next year as you have it on your warrant, but as it goes out a couple of years, you don't know exactly what they're going to do with the state. I mean, they replaced some of the state revenues that are coming to us, but you never know when they're gonna shift gears again.
Jay, is that an output of the data from all the sheets you get when we put it together and we start allocating funds based on year? Is part of that what the tax impact would be?
We can look at the tax impact. You know, I think what we're going to have to do is make assumptions, though. So, as an example, we would have to make an assumption that state aid, you know, is going to remain consistent. So you'd have to. We can do it. We'd have to make some qualifications just so everybody understands what we're assuming going into it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Does anybody have anything else before I open up to public comment?
Oh yeah, it took me a minute to get up mute. So what are the next steps here for the school capital improvement planning committee?
Well, it's a good question. I think what we need to do is, I think we need to look at, I think the important piece to this is looking at, sources of funding as a key thing here. Whatever is going to happen, I mean, right now, there's a lot of unknowns, and I think maybe we need some more information to try to understand what I think is the tax impact is going to be, and what sources of revenue are going to be available to help to offset costs and to bring, all of this to fruition. But I mean, that's my take on it. I don't know what the other members of the board feel. Does anyone have any suggestions?
Well, I think we need to understand some of the suggestions that we had posed, right? The police station maybe taking over part of GMS, because I mean, that's on the docket too. The SAU space was something else that I think the police chief had brought up for their space, community center. I mean, I think some of those things, they're all kind of intertwined. It'd probably be nice to have a good picture of what that would look like ultimately. Because I think there could be some cost savings there, but there also could be a stretch, right? I mean, we don't know what the renovation costs look like if we were going to switch spaces, how much that would offset from, the other activities that were out there for those spaces too. If you're having an HVAC problem, I mean, that wouldn't go away. You'd have to update that for the space. But it would offset the cost of a brand new police station, for example, or, the SAU space. So I think those are interesting things, and we probably need to have a little more insight into what that money would look like, because it would definitely shift what the planning would look like, or at least the proposals for this project. This is kind of all intermingled now.
So who owns that action then, right? I mean, who owns the next steps there, kind of pulling that together and looking at the numbers? Jay, is that something that you support us on? Is it more individualized where we go back to Troy? I'm really trying to get a picture of the next steps, so this just doesn't sit out there, right? There's action behind this.
Yep.
I think from my perspective, it'll be difficult for us to look at, what the actual cost differences would be of, say, building a freestanding police station versus, adapting the school. That's a little bit outside of my capabilities. To me, the next step, and this is just my thinking, is I think we need to have a conversation around just that issue, because we seem to have a couple of different potential facility needs and proposals out there, both of which maybe could utilize a school that we may be replacing. So I think that's a conversation that we need to have in itself. We have some suggestion, for example, that that facility may be usable as a police station. I don't know whether that's really so or not. I think we would need to have a conversation that probably involves the police department as a part of that. Does this facility work as a potential SAU? I don't know. We've also had a conversation around, well, if we build a new police station, maybe the former police station facility could be a good SAU office.
Right.
I have a hard time getting my arms around what those space needs look like, and whether or not the spaces that might be potentially made available by one of these moves work. So that's just kind of my thinking, is maybe we could have a focused session on those specific space needs, involving all the players, so we could get a better understanding of what might work. Again, that's just my gut reaction, but that feels like a next step that needs to happen.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I would find it, in my personal opinion, I would find it silly, right, to then go back to Chief Sergeant and say, hey, can you also consider plans to renovate, Griffin, in the event in 2023, 2024, we do get a new school, when he has real needs now, you know?
Right.
And we heard those real needs at our last committee meeting, right? And in fact, I think part of the next steps from that meeting resulting were to think about how we get plans to architect something at the fire station, right?
Mhm.
Because the proposal that we were presented that evening was a standalone structure, right? I think the next step for the chief's perspective was to go to the board and say, hey, you know, can we put some dollars behind this, right?
Yeah.
And then to go back to the board and say, hey, you know, well, time out, you know, can I also get money to get a plan for GMS? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me.
And I would say if that's the consensus, then that's off the table. We don't need to have that conversation. And then we could think about, okay, so now are we down to rec center or, you know, SAU? And again, I don't know the answer to those, but if it's, and that did seem where we were leaning. So now we've got some vacant space where the police station was that we have to figure out what to do with, or I would imagine we want to figure out what we want to do with. And again, potentially a school. And I don't know how strong the sentiment is around, you know, investing in a rec center. I'm not sure whether there's sufficient sentiment to make that investment.
Agreed.
You know, I think we need to keep in mind is anything we do to GMS, we have to keep concerned of that high water table that's over there.
Yep.
That could continue to bring in mold problems, you know, high water table, you know, so forth, flooding, you're in the floodplain once again. So, you know, is it feasible to do anything on that site?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'm just trying to figure out ways that, you know, this makes it more palatable for the taxpayers in the town. We can reuse something.
Definitely.
Sell sometimes, right?
Right. Hey, Ryan, I would add, we don't necessarily have to figure that out. We only have to address the issue of what to do with the former school if there's a capital cost associated with it within the 6-year period. We can acknowledge that that is an issue that needs to be dealt with, but we don't have to come up with a solution in this plan if we're not going to put a number next to it.
Yeah, I think that helps in terms of scope creep. However, I think from a long-term perspective and from a budget committee perspective, like we would want to know, right, are we still paying for and funding infrastructure that we're no longer utilizing, right? We would still have a responsibility to maintain that building at some point, right, to some degree,
Yeah.
if it's standing, even in its unused, potentially.
Right. Or to pay for its demolition. I mean,
Yeah, or pay for its demolition.
Right.
I mean, whatever it's going to be. You know, my personal view, right? We've heard about all the problems with the land. We've heard about all the problems with the school. I don't personally see it as a usable space in its current setup without significant funding behind it, which I don't know as a committee we should really be investing in, right? Or as a town, excuse me. So I mean, that is my 2 cents. You know, I don't know what the long-term plans are. I don't know what everyone else is thinking, but I'm being bold here and saying what my views are in the spirit of we can start the dialogue.
No, totally. I mean, I'm just throwing out the ideas. I mean, I'm taking notes here, and I'm like, well, you know, some of these are good ideas. You know, let's just run them out and see if they're feasible. But I mean, you know, do we know what the flood zone is on that property? By chance?
We can pretty easily find out. I mean,
Hi.
we-
I can find it.
Is that an answer?
We have the.
Well, I mean, I can go on FEMA and find out.
right.
I'm
If
just
you go
curious.
on, if you go on FEMA, you'll see that it's in the 100-year floodplain, and so it'll come right up. The whole school is smack dab in the middle of it.
Yeah, I'm just curious in the zone. I actually work with FEMA on that project, so I'm just curious what the flood zoning is. It's just interesting that it was built there to begin with.
Well, then I think it's
Middle
next
school
step, right?
out of the flood zone?
Oops, sorry, go ahead.
What's that?
Sorry, Andrew. Is
Yeah.
the middle school clear? Is that out of the flood zone?
I'm gonna pull the map right now.
I think if I recall, Sean, that it's predominantly in the flood zone.
Well, most of historic Litchfield was built in the floodplain.
Yeah.
Problem. Things we can't change, right?
Right.
So I think as a next step, you know, maybe and Mr. Weber, I don't know if you'll be talking to the town administrator about this, but maybe as a next step for our next committee meeting, whenever that's going to be scheduled, if that's later in June or if we elect to just defer it until July at this point. Maybe we have a session specifically talking about these different ideas and putting together some type of way forward, right? Because right now I see this stalling out without us being able to make decisions, right? And that's what I want to prevent.
I will call Troy tomorrow and have a discussion with him. I personally do feel that we should have another meeting this month to help vet out a lot of these
I
questions.
agree. Yep.
Yeah, we're really running up against time to get this executed in the time frame that we wanted to. So I think we're going to have more meetings than we have been having.
Yeah, I agree, and I think COVID didn't help us, right? So.
No, it didn't. And I think we have to. I mean, we have to really look at this issue. I mean, I don't think we don't want to rush it. I think it's important that we give it the thought and we do a good job of really looking at this and making sure that we're making the right decision. So I think perhaps another meeting to discuss that issue specifically would be worthwhile. So. So, yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we can have Steve. Maybe next time, when we have Troy back with us, can put that on the agenda for another meeting in the near future. And
Definitely.
Yeah. But I think, maybe Jay can give us some, in the meantime, maybe Jay can help out by giving us some, background information and so forth to give us,
Sure.
if he needs to,
Happy to.
with the details.
Looking at the calendar, the next free Monday night would be the 15th. If we wanted to stay with the Mondays.
Works for me. Let's get it scheduled.
Yeah, I have no conflict, so yeah, if anyone else is good with that, that works for me too.
Works for me.
Okay, I'll reach out to Troy tomorrow and have that conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Most welcome.
Okay, great. All right, so I do want to get public input. Is there any members of the public out there that have been listening to this that would like to comment this evening on what has been talked about or discussed? Do we have anybody in the public who would like to chime in?
Mr. Chair, there's nobody else but the committee.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Bruno. Okay, so I'll close public input on the discussion. Dr. Jetty, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think we've been able to get all the points across. And again, as the committee digs into those documents and takes a deeper look and starts to weigh it out, we're always available for questions. So just reach out, let us know. If you want our team back on the 15th to field questions, my calendar is free. I can certainly join in. Or if everybody's comfortable with Chairman Burke being the rep to field questions, we can proceed that way. Whatever pleases the committee, we're willing to do.
Okay, great. Well, we thank you very much for your time this evening, coming and speaking to us, and thank you both for the information and what you're allowing us the opportunity to look at this a little bit more closely. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
There's an order on the business items. There was something, and kind of, piggybacking what we've been talking about this evening and sources of funding. And it didn't dawn on me when we were talking about the police station last time. But actually, the idea came in my head about grants. And I know that there may be sources of funding out there for possibly for the police departments. And this might be something for Troy to look into, or Jay, maybe you to consider thinking about as well. If there's any grant monies that would be available to help with a new police station. Because I know, the federal government sometimes gives money to, aid to police, state give aid to police. That's just something I'm throwing out there, but it's something to think about, so.
We may also want to think about, to the extent that any improvements are in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, and I'm thinking specifically about the HVAC system at the middle school, there may be CARES Act funding that could be available.
Okay. That's a good point.
That's a great point. I didn't even think of that one.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider.
Well, and that was addressed actually at the budget committee meeting last week, right, where CARES funding is being anticipated. I don't know, Mr. Burke, if you have anything to comment on that, or Dr. Jetty, or Corey, Mr. Zbicki, on the CARES funding to the that the school might be receiving.
So just in general with CARES Act, so there's quite a fight going on in terms of the details with that. So we've been given a dollar amount, but the actual guidance and rules on how that money can be spent has not yet been established, and even the state is at odds with the federal government. And so at this point, we know that, and it's not a tremendous amount of money. It's about $75,000 that's available to us, and we don't yet know how we can spend that money. So we do know that we have until September of 21 to spend that money. So we're able to use it to mitigate costs going forward and backward to mid-March when all of this came into play. But that covers a good year and a half window of time to mitigate costs relative to COVID. And when you spread $75,000 out, it'll help with some expenses that we picked up, but I'm not sure it's going to go too far or too deep into all of the costs that go along with it.
Thank you.
So our next meeting will be June 15th. So we're going to look at, some of the, alternatives for the Griffin Memorial School, and see if we can't come up with some sort of an idea or a plan to move forward. Is there anything
Hey,
else?
Mike.
I'm sorry?
Mike, this is Sean. Are there any departments that we need to hear from? Are there any other proposals or plans?
It's a good question.
Well, we still need to hear from fire.
We still need fire, I think, library.
Yeah.
Who else do we need?
Transfer station.
Solid waste, yep, that's another one we haven't heard from.
Did we hear from Rec?
I think the Conservation Commission, right? Weren't they?
Conservation we need to hear from. We haven't heard from Rec yet either.
Right.
So I think not at the maybe the next one we can get one more on, because I think Rec's pretty close to being ready. I'm not sure where fire stands. And I think solid waste was pretty close, but I'll check with Troy. The next ones we might be able to get on the docket on top of just the general discussion about facilities.
A rec would be relevant to that conversation also, so.
Definitely, because I know Rec is only proposing two projects is what they have so far.
So probably if we can tie that in, that would be. Okay, very good. Does anybody have anything else this evening they'd like to talk about? Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, I mean, I don't have anything else for this evening. We'll have a meeting on June 15th. We'll continue this discussion. I think we'll be working on that. I mean, there's nothing else. I don't think there's anything else on the agenda. So I entertain a motion to adjourn, if nobody else has any questions.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have discussion? Second, okay, thank you. Do I have discussion? All right, roll call. All those voting members signify by saying aye. Michael Croto, aye.
Stephen Weber, aye.
Sean Flynn, aye.
Pete Stone, aye.
Brian Burke, aye.
Very good. No opposed, no abstains. So our next meeting will be June 15th at 6 o'clock. Be a virtual meeting of Griffin and go forward. Jay, thank you very much for being on the call this evening. Appreciate your input. We'll see you tomorrow evening for another meeting, planning board. And everyone else, stay well, stay safe, and thank you all for joining us this evening, and we will be back June 15th.
Thanks all. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Be well.
Thank you.
Care.
Night.
Good night.
Ready?